Well, hey everybody, Seth Campbell here with the new Segue Says podcast. Well, in this episode, we're going to look at two songs that feature singers with incredible vocal ranges, and that would be Geddy Lee of Rush, who we've talked about before, and Brandon Flowers of The Killers, who we haven't actually talked about before. And the two songs are fairly obscure. You won't find them on any greatest hits compilations, but, real fans of these bands tend to know and love these songs, and they tend to play them live from time to time. And I really like them. The two songs are Between the Wheels, that's the Rush song, and the Killers song is called The World We Live In. Now, these songs, they're very different. The only thing they really have in common is that the choruses utilize, if not the exact same chord progression, then something very similar. And I'll explain that briefly. But first, since chances are, if you don't really know a lot about these bands, you won't know these songs, so we're going to take a look at each of them a little bit. Now, Between the Wheels is the last song on the Rush album Grace Under Pressure, which is probably the second album in their period where they did a lot of keyboard-centric sounds, which is something they hadn't done previously. It's right after Signals, I think, is really the first one, and then Grace Under Pressure, which has a lot of dark songs and heavy concept material, and the best known songs off it are Distant Early Warning and Red Sector A. But then you have this one at the end, and this is probably one of my favorites off the record. It's very intense. It's basically about getting run over by life, hence Between the Wheels. Now, when it starts, you just have this keyboard sound out of thin air. Thinking 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3. But it's not, because when the rest of the band kicks in, it's 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2. And this is a pre-chorus chorus of Between the Wheels. Between a rock and a hard place, in between time, cruising in prime time, soaking up the cathode rays, in between the wars and our time, in real time, holding the good times, holding on to yesterdays. And then it goes double time. Rapid feels going under your spinning wheels. Defined images flashing by like a windshield towards the fly. Frozen in the fatal climb, but the wheels of time just pass you by. Wheels can take you around. Wheels can cut you down. You can go from boom to bust, from dreams to a ball of dust. We can fall from rockets' red glare down to brother, can you spare another war, another wasteland, and another lost generation. Then it goes back to halftime for the second verse. So as you can hear, very dramatic and intense song, and it also goes from this D Dorian verse pre-chorus to this, I guess you could call it F Lydian. It implies C major but never actually hits C major, because this chorus progression, and this is going to be important for our segue, is F, G, E minor, F, and basically it loops that until the last one, which holds the E minor for twice as long, and then goes back to the D Lydian pattern, or not Lydian, Dorian. So that's Between the Wheels. Now we move on to The World We Live In, which is this off the Day and Age album, and it's actually the lyric of this song that gives the title of the album, Day and Age. So it's kind of a reverse title track. I don't know how that works. But actually, this was first brought to my attention by one of my professors at Berkeley, Marty Walsh, who I've mentioned before, legendary session guitarist. He was doing an arrangement of it and was going to have me write some charts for it. And unfortunately, the project never actually manifested, but it got me listening to this song, and it's honestly, I think it's definitely my favorite Killers song. And there are a lot of songs of theirs that I like, and then some that don't really thrill me as much, but I can tell, are good quality, but, don't really grab me. But this one is honestly probably the most moving Killers song to me. Now, it's going to sound pretty different, except for a certain chord progression that you'll notice. And I'll explain how these two can tie together in a moment. And it uses a principle we don't use often in this podcast because it can be very risky to try to use it, but we'll get to that in a moment. So this is how this song begins. I'm going to do it intro through the first chorus. This is the world that we live in. I feel myself get tired. Yes, it's the world that we live in. Well, maybe I was mistaken. I heard a rumor that you quit this day and age. Well, maybe I was mistaken. Bless your body, bless your soul. Pray for peace and self-control. I gotta believe it's worth it. Without a victory, I'm so sanctified and free. But maybe I was mistaken. Lesson learned and the wheels keep turning. Yes, it's the world that we live in. I can't take blame for it too. Yes, it's the world that we live in. And maybe we'll make it through. And it goes back into the verse. Now, as you can hear, this song is kind of all over the place because the chorus is in, again, implied C major, and this one actually has, in place of the E minor, a C major first inversion, and the melody gives the seventh of that. So basically you have the same notes as the E minor plus a C, but the bass line is basically the same, and the lengths of the chords are the same, though you'll notice this song is markedly slower, and that's where the risky principle we're going to talk about comes in. So there's a certain type of segue, and I can't remember if we've done this before or not. And we've done over 100 episodes, so I hope you'll forgive the fact that I don't have all of them memorized off the top of my head. But there's a certain type of segue when you have two songs that have a similar sound and feel to them, but are at different tempos, where when you're playing one, you just kind of slowly speed up, gradually speed up, gradually speed up, or gradually slow it down, gradually slow it down. And that is what we're going to do with this one. Now, this one only works one way, really, which is between the wheels into the world that we live in. And I got the idea to do this kind of in reverse, I guess, because my mentor's band, the Brew, sadly now defunct, but I've mentioned them a couple times in the podcast, and they were great at segues. And of course, they were greatly inspired and guided by Bruce Hornsby, who was greatly inspired by the Grateful Dead, who are of course the kings of segues. So there's kind of that, fourth generation Segue lineage, I guess you could say. But they did a show once, and in fact, this was a fan-designed set list, and they figured out how to do it. They had a song called Radio Swiss that had this like very driving, fast beat. And they found a way to do that in the middle of Led Zeppelin's No Quarter, which, if you know that one, is very dark and slow. And so what they did is they kind of got to the jam in the middle of No Quarter. And slowly began to increase the tempo. You know it, eventually they got fast enough. And so that's how that works. And as a matter of fact, kind of a spin-off, if you will, of the Brew, because it has two members of the Brew, Dave Druon and Aaron Zaroulis, in it, a band called Cold Engines, who I've also had the great joy and honor to play with, did a similar thing. They have a song called Show You Crazy that has a jam section in C-sharp minor, and when I played with them, you know, it's kind of, in some ways, a callback to the Brew. We slowed down, slower in that jam section into No Quarter. So it's that kind of principle. But as you can hear, again, just me playing it alone, you know, it can be a little sloppy and it can be a little dangerous because you have to, and especially if you're playing with a band and you have to change the tempo, you know, everyone has to be on the same page. So it's really risky. But if the songs connect well enough with each other, it can be worth it. And I think this segue that we're looking at here today is one of those that's worth it. Now, the end of Between the Wheels goes back to that halftime D Dorian minor verse pattern. But it doesn't have to. Because if you want to end with the chorus, which is this F, G, E minor, F, which we definitely do, at the very end of it, can you spare another war, another wasteland, and another lost generation? Instead of going to that D minor after the twice held E minor, you could just start the chorus progression over again. And fortunately, because D minor is the relative minor of F, the melody still works just fine. So, brother, can you spare another war, another wasteland, and another lost generation? I like to improvise here for a little bit to establish that we're going to continue with this progression. And then eventually, when you're ready to start slowing down, just kind of pick like a pattern of voicings with the right hand that, you know, it has sort of like a guide tone. And one of the things that helps is, as a matter of fact, in the world we live in, there's a synth string line that plays this melody, which is C, B, B, A. And it just repeats that. So if you wanted to have that at the top of your voicings in between the wheels, just a little extra connection there. And the key is not to, okay, inevitable, terrible pun and paradox, contradiction, oxymoron, whatever, at the same time here. The key is not to rush the slowdown. You really have to sell it, and almost to the point where people don't even notice that that's what you're doing. One of the ways to do it, and you don't have to do it this way, is to only really change the pace at the beginning of each phrase. So at the turnaround, you slow down just a little. At some point here, it can really be anywhere, you essentially switch from playing the E minor to the C major 7 over E. Since the world that we live in, I feel myself get tired. Yes, it's the world that we live in. So what seems like too great a disparity in tempo to overcome has suddenly become almost seamless, in that if you do it gently enough and subtly enough as you slow down, you know, the audience will go with you. They won't be taken out of the mood. Again, requires precision, honestly. You got to be careful with it. You know, don't hurry it up too much, or you'll break the illusion almost. But you know, with a little practice, you can, you know, sooner or later you'll get it. You'll figure out, you know, what the best pace for you and your performance is. And you can do this with all sorts of different songs. But I personally think you want a stronger segue to first start exploring this principle. Because sometimes, like, if you're a little bit off, the combination of the songs can still save you. If the segue isn't very strong, it's harder to do that. But in any event, there you have it. So hopefully you enjoyed. Hopefully you've learned something. And I will see you in the next episode.